So, Captain America Brave New World is finally here, and after seeing it, I gotta be honest with you all, I'm feeling a little bit disappointed. On one hand, I've enjoyed seeing Mackie as Falcon and seeing him become the new Cap. I really dug seeing him step into the role, and I was excited to see where they were going to take the character. Now, don't get me wrong, there are definitely some cool action moments and some character interactions I enjoyed, but after the credits roll, it just felt empty. Like it was playing things a little too safe that we'll discuss a little bit later. The story felt predictable, and while the adamantium and the celestial setups had potential, it kind of fizzled out. But look, it's not all doom and gloom. Let's get into some elements of the film that I actually thought worked. Let's start by talking about the lead star and Captain America himself, Sam Wilson. Look, last night I recorded my initial reaction, and I have to admit I misspoke. I said that this film proved to me that Anthony Mackie isn't a leading man, but I was incorrect. To me, Anthony Mackie isn't the problem here. It's how I felt about the character and how the character's been handled so far at points and how he's written in this film in particular. Bringing it back to Anthony Mackie, I do think he does his best with this role in this particular film and its story, and he's carrying his weight, and he brings what I like about Sam in the MCU and what he brings to the character and what he represents and what he believes in and how he believes in the best in people, and I just understand why Steve Rogers gave him the shield and gave him the mantle of Captain America. He's also very believable in the action moments, which we'll discuss here in a bit, so I want to amend my comment from my initial reaction. Anthony Mackie isn't the problem here. He is a good Captain America. It's just, as we'll discuss later, it's how the character was written for me that didn't really work. Now, speaking to the direction of this movie, we have the director Julius Onah, who directed a movie that I thought was excellent, but he also directed a movie that I thought was awful. Now, those movies I'm referring to is 2019's Loose, which is an excellent movie, highly recommended, and then the other film I was referring to was Cloverfield Paradox, which I thought was a terrible movie, and I think we see both his greatness that he has to offer as a director in this film, but we also see some of his shortcomings as well. But speaking to the greatness of him as a director, I think he does a good job of showcasing the interpersonal relationships between some of the characters in this film. For example, one of the best things I took away was the continued relationship between Sam and Isaiah Bradley that was introduced in the show and carries into this film. There's a respect that Sam shows and has for Isaiah Bradley that I personally respond to based on what we learned from the show, and also the comics of the character that I know about Isaiah Bradley and everything that he went through from his past and how Sam tries to help him through his tragic experiences and wants him to get his flowers that he deserves. Now, as it comes to this film and Isaiah Bradley's role in this movie and watching this almost mirror relationship that we have between Steve and Bucky in a way, in the sense that we saw Steve having to continuously prove Bucky's innocence and trying to save his friend, we got that in this film. We see that with Sam and Isaiah, and as I'll talk about later, I wish we would have gotten more from Isaiah because I really like that character, but again, I really did enjoy their chemistry and relationship that we saw within this movie. I also thought that Julius had a pretty solid handle on some of the more mysterious elements of this film that was presented and handled some of the more personal conflict that the characters like General, now President Ross, experienced. Now, we know that President Ross has a history within the MCU of being the quote-unquote villain at times, but in this film, he's trying to right his wrongs. He's trying to rebuild his relationships with individuals like Sam Wilson, but also prove to America that he's changed. But the more interpersonal relationship that he has with his daughter is everything to him, and he's trying to show that he's a different man, and this is obviously a plot that transpires from all the way to 2008's Incredible Hulk. So while I had my issues with some of the creative decisions that we'll discuss a little bit later, I thought that those were examples of things that I liked about the direction from Julius. Now look, I go to see these films to be entertained and have some good action, and for the most part, I got just that. Now, not all the action hit for me in this film, but I do want to highlight its best action sequence, and it's the one that really separates what makes Sam different from Steve and other characters within the MCU, and that's his ability to be an expert with his wings and aerial combat. Now, I won't reveal too much, but when the film hits its climax and it hits its peak for me is when we see the battle on the Celestial Island, and there's a war developing over a resource that we'll discuss a little bit later that is very valuable in this film and valuable to the MCU, and just that whole scene to me was pretty exhilarating. It's easily the best action sequence of the film and the best action sequence that Sam has been a part of individually speaking, not including in-game, but that to me is the highlight that shows his skills, but also the best action scene of the entire movie. Now, I wasn't as impressed with some of the green screen work in that scene, but again, the actual action was pretty damn impressive. But another thing I liked about the scene is the character work. We get to see Sam being compassionate, his true superpower of de-escalating the situation and saving lives in the process. Again, I can't state this enough, but that is the best scene of the film, hands down. But going back and speaking more to the individual characters and performances, I really thought Harrison Ford really tried bringing something new to this very underdeveloped character within the MCU so far. And that character is Thaddeus Ross, who previously was played by William Hurt, rest in peace. And like I mentioned, he's been shown in a more villainous light and really hasn't been given much as a character, but this time around, that's much different. Harrison gets to add more layers and more complexity to this character, and you get to see the other side of the character who's went toe-to-toe with various Avengers and is a big reason why the team was dismantled. But here we see him trying to right his mistakes and trying to do right by his old decisions, but we also see that his past catches up to him in this film, and we get the real villain working behind the shadows that comes to the light and brings forth the Red Hulk plot. But again, I thought Harrison Ford showed why he's one of the greatest actors of his generation, and if you haven't seen his work on Shrinking on Apple TV+, he's great in that show. It's a great show in general, but he's great in that. He's really solid in this film, and he just brings such a gravitas to this character, and I thought that he was one of the standout characters within this film. And last thing I'll say is, I personally appreciated the seriousness within the tone. It's mostly consistent throughout the film. They weren't trying to crack jokes every other scene or have moments that felt completely tonally out of place. I thought there were some solid moments and dive into the more political angle and touching on themes of having absolute power and how it can corrupt individuals, and how perseverance and standing by your conventions and having morals like a Sam Wilson can overcome some of his conflicts and challenges that he faces in this film. But switching gears and getting into my criticisms of the film, I said this in my initial reaction out of my out-of-theater reaction for the film, but when the credits roll and you see 5 people credited for the screenplay and 3 people for the story, it all made sense to why it felt like a movie made by committee. There's such a lack of focus on what this story is actually about. We have Sam Wilson, who's trying to prove himself that he is the right person to be Captain America. He, at the same time, is trying to prove the innocence of Isaiah Bradley. We have the president and his personal story with his family and trying to prove his dominance in this race for this resource fought over in the film. We have the shadow villain who's been working behind the scene, who's been done wrong in the past, and the leader trying to tear the country apart. On top of that, we have the Serpent Society. We have answering the question on where the Avengers are. We have a new Falcon. We have the Celestials from Eternals, and all these loose ends from a Hulk movie that came out in 2008. And those are just a few examples of what this film is throwing at you, all under 2 hours. There are so many ideas, and some of them are interesting, but none of them feel fully executed or fully realized. I also wasn't a fan of the very generic dialogue, especially in the more impactful scenes throughout this film. I also felt that there were some poorly edited scenes that felt stitched together. Like I mentioned earlier with the green screen being used in the main battle, there are other moments that I felt the CGI still needed proper rendering. Getting into the pacing of this film, I felt the first act felt like a prologue and an epilogue of a missing episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and not in a good way. Then we get into the core of the story. It's so convoluted and feels so empty because we've spent so little time with the central characters that the story is so focused on. Like, I was thinking of doing a spoiler breakdown for this film, but honestly, there isn't really much to spoil because this is one of the most safest and predictable MCU films to date. I mentioned what I liked about Julius' direction, but I don't think he had any bold or creative choices in his direction in this film, and it's just operating on a very one-dimensional level. Going back to the story without giving too much away, I truly mean this when I say this is a Hulk sequel, but instead of for Bruce Banner, we have Sam Wilson. This is more of a Hulk movie, and Sam happens to be caught in the middle. Everything about the central foundation of this film stems from characters who haven't been seen in years, and they expect the audience to buy into the conflicts and the events from films that haven't been received with open arms. For example, this film wants you to pick up on the emotional depths from a Hulk film and the consequences from a film that came out in 2008, but they also want you to have seen a television series to understand Isaiah Bradley and who he is and what he's experienced, but also understand that there's a giant celestial in the middle of the Indian Ocean from a film that I enjoyed, but a lot of other people didn't. Now, I've seen every single MCU project. That includes films and movies, and I own most of the films, but again, I don't care about things that happen in a 2008 Hulk movie. I don't care to rehash plots that we've seen from a television series that enters into this film. Again, I felt this film had so many cooks in the kitchen, plus if you know the trouble production it had, all those things made for a weightless experience for me when it came to this very clunky and lackluster story. Now, another thing I thought was very underwhelming was the supporting characters. Now, as a Captain America fan, I think he's got the best trilogy trilogy in the entire MCU. Like, hands down, there's no debate to that in my opinion, but I can even admit that those films heavily rely on not good, but great supporting cast and characters. From the first Cap film to Winter Soldier, where Sam was introduced himself and it was a great character, and even in Civil War, Cap's a great character, but he has the luxury of having interesting characters surrounding him as well. But bringing it back to this film, minus Isaiah Bradley, I felt most of the new supporting characters felt out of place and just weren't good. You have someone as talented as Giancarlo Esposito, as this D-list character as Sidewinder, who's the leader of the Serpent Society. He was just completely wasted. I understand that they wanted to use him as like a Crossbones type of character or a Batroc in this film, a character that continuously kind of pops up and creates chaos for the main hero, but every time we saw Giancarlo Esposito in this film, I just didn't care, nor did I take him seriously at all. Now, this actor and this character they're portraying comes with a lot of controversy, but I'll leave that for you all to research on your own, but let's talk about the character Ruth. Now, this isn't a spoiler, this is public knowledge. She's a former Black Widow and a high-ranking U.S. government official who has close allies with the president, and I could care less about this character. Not to be mean, but just the physical stature of the character. She's like 4 feet tall, and every time we saw her on screen, I just felt like I was watching a child, especially in those fight sequences, and I just thought that the character was pointless and so random and unnecessary. Again, going back to what they're trying to mirror this character to be, she's the Sharon Carter or Maria Hill type of a character, but was nowhere close to being anywhere as near interesting or exciting as those characters I just mentioned. Then you have who I believe was supposed to be the love interest of Sam Wilson, and that's Layla Taylor. Now, she's playing a Secret Service agent that works really closely with the president in the film, and I don't want to sound mean. I don't want to be mean. I've seen this actor in another television series that I love. She was in Atlanta. She was great in the episode she was in. She's a solid actor. But in this movie, she was as dry as sand and offered nothing to the role. And then you have Danny Ramirez, who I like as an actor. He plays Joaquin Torres, who we met in the television series, and I thought he was fine in the TV show, but I'm going to be honest, I don't remember him being as annoying as he was in this movie. He came off very childish in the film to me and kind of naive at points and was very much giving little brother energy throughout the film. Now, I'm not saying he's useless like I did with those other characters I just mentioned, but his portrayal, again, was very kiddish and was used for the comic relief at points. And of course, he's supposed to be the new Falcon and supposed to be the new Sam in this situation, but it just didn't work for me. And then you look at the film's actual villain, which the marketing made sure to hide, and now I know why. Now, this isn't a spoiler, this is public knowledge, but the incredible actor Tim Blake Nelson returns as Samuel Stearns, aka the leader. Again, I said this earlier, but the film wants you to remember a character that had a very small role in a film that came out in 2008 who had an accident involving his brain with Bruce Banner's blood, and his superpower is having a super brain. But man, what an awful, and I mean awful, villain. Look, the idea behind the character and their motives and how it fit into the narrative, it makes sense, but the use of the character and the fact there was no lead up, there was no build up for the character to return, and what they've been doing this whole time, it was just lazy to me. Great actor, love the actor so much, very interesting character, but again, just poorly executed, just a terrible villain across the board. But again, to that point, the film puts too much emphasis on characters and on stories that haven't been spoken of or haven't been a focus, like the relationship between Ross and Betty. To me, it's just such a weird concept to have a Captain America movie rely so heavily on things and characters that have no personal connection to the actual lead character. Which brings me to my final and last point, and one of my most frustrating points of this film, and that's the mishandling of the lead character, Sam Wilson. I felt the character Sam Wilson has had moments that I've enjoyed in the MCU, but there's also times that I felt the MCU has misrepresented the character. I don't want to go on this long rant, but there's really no real connection between his story and everything else going on that this film has to offer. We've never seen a one-on-one scene between Sam and Ross until now, and Sam had zero ties to any of the Hulk or the Eternal storylines presented here, and the worst part for me was the rehashing of the same story of him not feeling worthy enough to be and take the shield and take the mantle of being Captain America. It made me so angry to see him still questioning himself about being Cap and being Steve leave and not having taken the serum. Like, I spent 6 hours of a show exploring this, and he came to accept the responsibility by the end. But this is where the MCU has been terrible in the last few years at making the audience care about their shows, because if you have to repeat things because not everyone is caught up. So someone like me, who's seen all the movies and the shows, has to sit through a 2-hour movie where half the time the main character is still questioning if he's right for the job. Look, that's the superhero trope. Spider-Man, Thor, Iron Man, whoever, there comes a time when we see the superhero has to question themselves in their own story. Can they be the hero they need to be? Can they stop the villain that's in their film? I get all that. But after they discover that purpose, we move on and they get to thrive. But here we see Sam yet again being questioned, and he's questioning himself and gets to the point that I'm just tired of seeing what I wanted and felt that was needed for him to have a level of confidence in himself, and not just in the last 15 minutes or so of the film. So to me, I feel the film underestimated and underwritten Sam, and I feel like they did a disservice to the character. The other things I won't spend too much time on, but I thought it was worth mentioning. The fight over adamantium was extremely underwhelming, and I don't really know what the point of it being included in the story without the inclusion of mutants. The pacing at the start was extremely uneven, and even moments in the second half as well. I felt the film tried way too hard to repeat or to try to capture a similar tone and themes that we got from 2014's Winter Soldier. It really failed at doing that. And lastly, the Red Hulk of it all was just underused. If you've seen the trailer, you've pretty much seen all the scenes that the Red Hulk is in. And you know, to add more to this Red Hulk conversation and speaking to the action, the clip was online a couple weeks ago about Sam fighting one of the Serpent Society members, and it's just an awful fight, hand-to-hand combat fight. And there are other scenes in this film that I thought was pretty underwhelming from an action standpoint. But one of the issues that I had with the action, besides the one action scene I talked about that was fantastic, is we see Sam struggling to fight against regular human beings. And I'm sorry, the film never made me believe that Sam can go one-on-one, head up versus a Hulk. I thought that sequence, that fight, while it had visual cool moments, we haven't seen a Raging Hulk in since 2017. It was great to see a Red Hulk, a Raging Hulk, but again, I was never bought into the illusion or the suspension of disbelief in the scene where we see Sam versus the Red Hulk. It was pretty underwhelming as well. And without spoilers, the film has one post-credit scene, and it's not the worst that they've ever done, but it's pretty damn bad, and it felt like a last-minute reshoot, and it felt like it was just shoehorned in to remind us of what's to come. So look, before we get into my overall thoughts on my score, I want to take this time to thank you all for making it to this point of this breakdown. If you've enjoyed yourself so far, consider hitting that like button, but more importantly, consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel. Overall, despite what I've seen in the comments from my first initial reactions that I shared a couple days ago, I wanted this movie to be great. I wanted to see Sam Wilson thrive as Captain America. I wanted to see the MCU continue to evolve and surprise us, but unfortunately, I felt this film overpromised and underdelivered. There's incomplete storytelling, there's underdeveloped characters, there's meaningless setups and arcs that felt rushed, but more importantly, I felt it was a disservice to a character that deserves more, and even with my disappointment, I hope Sam Wilson gets more opportunities to prove himself worthy of the title of Captain America. Congratulations for making it to this point of my review of Captain America Brave New World. It's now your turn to share your thoughts about the film in the comments below. What did you all think of the film? If you're watching this before the release, are you still excited for Brave New World? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and also hit that notification bell. That way you don't miss a thing. Until next time, as always, you're awesome, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.